Exclusively on the Oysterling podcast, the fastest growing hospitality job platform in the US, Chef David Skinner discusses his journey from oil and gas to creating Eculent, an avant garde multisensory restaurant, and ISHTIA, a Native American fine dining concept. He shares insights on consulting with NASA and the power of food storytelling. The legendary Chef David Skinner, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
So, Chef, could you please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your career path?
Sure. My name's David Skinner. I'm the owner and chef at two restaurants. One's called ISHTIA, which is our Native American tasting menu restaurant, and the other one is Eculent, which we had in for, I guess, 10 years. And then we closed it to open ISHTIA, and then we just recently reopened it last year. So Eculent is more of a avant-garde type restaurant. Anyway, two kind of extremes, I guess I would say. Yeah, so I've had kind of an unusual path, I guess, towards being a chef and restaurant owner. My first restaurant was when I was 16. It was a French restaurant called La Vie en Rose. And then I had a second restaurant called Christopher's on Washington, which was what we kind of consider farm to table now. That was long before that term was out there. That was when I was in college. And then I did oil and gas, pharmaceuticals, heavy industry strategy work for about 30 years. And then started Eculent in 2014. Uh, I had started um, an oil field service company that reclaimed produced water from oil wells with Michael Dell and his MSDC venture fund, and I had been doing that for 4 years and was just kind of tired of it and ready to do something different. And my wife's like, "So are you going to start another consulting firm or something?" And I said, "No, I've got an idea for a restaurant that no one would ever fund. So I think I'm the one to probably do it." And so that was the start of Eculent, which what really made it unique was not just the food, but we created a dynamic atmosphere. So one of the few restaurants in the world where we could literally change the lighting. We could change the smell for each course. I hired a music director that created basically a soundtrack for each menu, so we could, adjust tonal qualities and tempo and everything else to go with the dish that was coming out. So it was very groundbreaking at the time, and probably actually kind of still is. There's not really very many restaurants in the world that do anything like that. Uh, but that was back in 2014, and I was getting ready to turn 50. And I told my wife if I don't do it before I turn 50, I'll never do it. Because being a chef's kind of a young person's game. So I probably should do it. If I'm going to do it, I need to do it now, not wait. So that's what I did. The first couple of years were a bit. Um, some of it was, I guess, we fired a lot of customers. Being in Texas, people come in and assume they're going to get, like a big steak and big potato and, all this, very kind of cliche, but somewhat true, for Texas, large portions. And we were serving, 30 courses of, small bites, and it just kind of threw people off. And so that was, so the first couple of years, we're just kind of trying to educate our customers, work on menus, fine tuning things. The lighting and sound came pretty quick. The smells took a very long time. We worked with a fragrance designer in LA, but if you think back to 2014, technology was still somewhat in its infancy with a lot of systems, and there was basically no system for doing smells. And so what we had to do was build our own systems, and so that took a bit, but um, we eventually got all that figured out, and then um, We were fortunate enough to have Tom Satsima from the Washington Post come and review us, and we got a really great review. It was like 4 pages in the Post, on a Sunday, and kind of after that, all hell broke loose, and we sold, 3 months of reservations in 30 seconds, and built up a wait list of over 6,000 people trying to get in, and it was just kind of crazy for a very long time, which was great. Not knowing the pandemic was coming, that really sustained us through the pandemic, and you know, uh, and continued on. And then when I closed the restaurant in 24, everybody was kind of like, you're kind of insane. Why would you be closing a successful restaurant? I'm like, well, I've got something else I want to do. My background is Choctaw. There's very few Native American restaurants in America, which to me it's it just it kind of, I don't know. It makes no sense. I mean, it's like, okay, Native Americans were here first. The ingredients are almost identical to Mexican, and yet there's, a dozen, you know, Native American restaurants. I mean, if you throw in all the food trucks and things like that, and little pop-ups here and there, yeah, maybe you get up to, I don't know, 75, 100, but that's it. In Houston alone, we have something on the order of like 5,000 Mexican restaurants. So I mean, it's it's the scale is not even comparable. And yet cooking techniques very similar, to the traditional, not, I would say, like Tex-Mex and things like that, but traditional, Mexican food that you would have in Oaxaca, or go down the Yucatan, and, have in Merida, Tulum, and other places. So it's very, very similar. And so anyway, I just thought, you know, I already created one restaurant that no one had really kind of ever seen. So, why not do another one? Because, there's, like I said, very few Native American restaurants. There's even fewer that are, fine dining. And so that was kind of the goal, was, let's elevate what would be kind of traditional flavors and ingredients, that, the problem that I've seen over the years with, with kind of Native American food, if you ask people, well, I mean, if you ask people about, Italian food, Mexican food, Chinese, Japanese, whatever, they can list off, you know, a dozen, you know, items, right? It's like, oh, burritos, tacos, chalupas, da 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 da, right? You just keep going on and on. It's like, okay, well, name 5 Native American dishes, and people are like, fry bread and Indian tacos, and it's like, yeah, that's carnival food. That's not real Native American food. Not to say it's not tasty.
Yeah.
It is. I've had my fair share of fry bread over the years, but, the connotation behind fry bread is really, quite horrible, because it came from, government rations because of the Trail of Tears, and moving all of these different, indigenous groups from where they were to basically Oklahoma, or some other land. And, the government gave them, processed wheat, processed, sugar, and lard, and what do you make from that? Well, you make fry bread. And, for people who don't know what fry bread is, it's basically, think of eating like a funnel cake or a donut, right? Morning, noon, and night. And yeah, you can put meat on it. You can do other things. You don't have to make it quite as sweet. You can do this and that, but you're basically still eating a donut, right? With
Yeah.
whatever it is. And so it brought with it heart disease and diabetes, and tons of just really bad things, obesity, you name it. So while it might be very tasty, it has, not a very good connotation for people that actually know it. And unfortunately, that's what most people think of when you say Native American food. So my whole goal was dispel that belief, show people what native cooking really is, and educate them that it's not fry bread.
I'm glad, by the way, you mentioned all these points because my questions were around what you just said. So let
Okay.
me start with Eculate because you mentioned that you were able to control the light and the smell and everything inside the restaurant. And I've been watching some of the videos, by the way, and like today I was just watching the picnic tasting menu, and I have to admit I'm beyond impressed with everything I saw there. So something crossed my mind. What do you want people to enjoy more? Is it the experience or the food? You mentioned the people in Texas didn't quite like it in the beginning. So, did you expect them to come back for the food or to come back for the experience itself?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. Um, I think it has to be the food first and the experience second. And the reason I say that is there are lots of kind of high-end, avant-garde restaurants, molecular restaurants, all over the world. I've been basically to all of them. Um, and there are some that I would say the food is really delicious, and there are others where it's like, food's not that great. Maybe the experience was fantastic. And I even know some chefs that purposely serve food that doesn't taste good just for a reaction, right? And so to me, it's like if you're spending a lot of money for a dinner, the food has to be delicious to start with, and then if you can bundle that with an experience that makes them, you know, A, want to return and B, feel like they really got value for the money, then I think, you've got a winning combination. But I think if you're going to do a restaurant just for an experience, you kind of have to let people know that. You kinda have to model it that way. To me, that's like, if you wanna go to, like, Rainforest Cafe or something, right? Someplace take the kids, Chuck E. Cheese, whatever, right? That's,
Yeah.
the food's not gonna be great, but the kids will have a great time, and maybe you've got a good experience out of it, right? But if you're going to go to a place where you're gonna spend $1,000 for dinner for 2 people, that food better be pretty tasty, and if it's not, then you've got a problem. And my whole, thing with Eculent was not just should the food be good, but how much flavor can we shove into the smallest possible bite, And that was kind of what we really became known for were these really small bites that pack so much flavor that people are like, I don't have to have, a big steak. I don't have to have a whole plate of something, right? I can have this one little bite and it's like everything's in there. So like our famous bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich. It's served in a little tiny cherry tomato. And, people look at it and they're just like, "Oh, it's just a tomato, right?" And I'm like, "Okay, well, close your eyes and chew it up." And you just see the look on their face as it changes, and they're like, "How in the hell did you do that?" Because it felt like I actually bit into a sandwich and I was chewing up a whole sandwich and it had all the flavors and nothing was overpowering. And I was like, yeah, well, that took me 3 months of experimenting to figure that one out. And I get people in all the time, it's like, well, there's what, like 4 ingredients to it, right? And I'm like, well, yes and no. You have to understand the ratios that's required so that you get the right mouthfeel and you get the right flavors and you get the right texture. But you also have to do certain things to those ingredients to make them to where it all comes together, in the right way. Because if you just shove regular lettuce into that, it won't work. So we freeze dry our lettuce. So, it takes a day or so just to do that, just to prep that one ingredient. And then we do special things to the bacon that goes in it. And then, we've got a special way that we do the bread and all that. But when it's done and you chew this thing up, you feel like you just bit into an actual sandwich. It's not like it's just the flavors, it's the texture of the sandwich. And I get people all the time, they're like, I don't like tomatoes. I'm like, well, just try this. And they'll try it and they're like, oh my God, how in the world did you do that? I'm like, well, that's why you're here, right? So it tastes great and you get an experience that you can't get anywhere else.
I have two comments here. Have you ever thought what might happen if you take out the experience and just serve those bites for people just eat it? Do you believe they will have the same reaction to that without I mean I saw you were there present, you were giving them these instructions, close your eyes, bite into this. What if you were not there and they just had it? What would be the reaction? And my second comment is I saw those cherry tomatoes and have you ever received like requests from people to have like bigger portions like okay they get one, what if someone wants a lot of these so they can actually keep having that, or is it only about serving one cherry tomato? Because I was checking the comments and people were like, what if I want 10, what if I want 20, what if I want more from these?
Yeah. So we've kind of I can answer your question with absolute certainty. So as I said, we closed Eculent in 24, and we just reopened it last October, but as a kind of a different concept. So we don't we're actually getting ready this next month to bring back the full big tasting menu. But what we've been doing is what we call a taste of Eculent now, which is 13 of these really famous one bite courses that we serve to people in a completely different space. So the space I'm in now is the old Eculent space. And if you kind of look in the ceiling, you can see all the different lighting fixtures we have. I don't know. I can
Yep.
you can kind of see if you look, there's kind of a box with a hole. So up in the corner. So that is one of the scent generators that we had. So they're placed throughout the ceiling of the restaurant. And that's where we would have the different smells come out of. But but anyway, we have a completely new space for the new version of Eculent, and we don't change the lights. We don't introduce smells. We don't have a custom soundtrack. Um, and the reaction is basically the same. People are just like,
Nice.
"Oh my god," you know, that totally blew me away. I had no idea that was coming. And the second part of the question, we have an a la carte menu where people can order the BLTs on their own. So we get people in every night that are like, "Yeah, I'll have a plate of those." It's like, "Okay, you can order a plate of those now." Um, we don't we never we tried we did one experiment where we put them in like a more of like a Campari size tomato, so like, 3, 4 times the size of a cherry tomato. But in order to get the right experience, you really have to be able to kind of eat it in one bite and process it that way, right? And so we just didn't, people like cut it with a fork, and it was just like, no, that's not it. It needs to just be, a cherry
One
tomato.
bite.
So just order more of them, but it needs to be that one bite where you just pop it in your mouth and away it goes. So yeah. So I don't know. That
Amazing.
hopefully that answers your questions.
Yeah, I mean it answers my question, all the comments that I saw, so yes, this will answer everyone's questions about it. And while also preparing for this, I found something interesting that I would like to learn more about from you. Did you actually consult NASA on making food taste better in space?
Yes, that's true.
How did that conversation even start, or what can I learn more about this?
Sure, sure. Um, our restaurants are about 5 miles from NASA here in Houston. So we get, astronauts all the time, coming in. We get, lots of people that work at NASA coming in. As a matter of fact, for the grand opening, of Eculent, I had, Clay Anderson in, who, I don't know if he still holds the record for a number of days in space, but he did for a while. And so he was in for our grand opening, and we hit it off, and he and his wife and I really became friends. And he was just like, you need to work um with the people at NASA, because this is just not, your food's so much better. And anyway, I was like, well, I'd be happy to you know, do whatever I can, right? And he's like, "Okay, well, I'm gonna set it up." And sure enough, it was like maybe a week or two later, and I get a call from the uh, lady that ran the food science group at NASA. And she's like, Clay said we need to talk. And I was like, okay, and so we invited um, the whole NASA team over here and they toured. So we have a complete food lab. So the things that we were doing with Eculent, you couldn't do without a food lab. And so we have, rotovaps and centrifuges and freeze dryers, and I mean, you name it, any kind of crazy lab, piece of equipment, I would, when I graduated college, I went to work for Conoco in the R&D group, and so I was used to having, kind of a lab, there. Anyway, so I basically just recreated, a lab, but focused on food instead of chemical. Um, anyway, so we brought them over and we fed them lunch and kind of walked them through, all the things that we do. Their mind was just blown and they were like, "Oh my gosh," and they made this comment to me. They're like, "You have more equipment than NASA." And I'm like, "Oh, that has to be a complete lie. There's no way." I said, I don't have the budget NASA has." And they're like, "No, no, you have more equipment." And I was like, "Okay." So anyway, about a month later, we went to NASA to tour their facilities and they were correct. I have more equipment, but theirs is on a scale that's, 100 times the size of mine. Their freeze dryers you can drive a truck into, and mine are, this big, right? So that was very eye opening. But but the thing that we discovered was there's some fundamental sort of physiological issues that come into play when you're trying to figure out food for space or space travel. And we worked with them on some ideas for the Mars mission and a bunch of different things. It's something that most people and I honestly didn't even know or think about it at the time, because when I'd asked Clay that night that he was in for our grand opening, I was just like, well, I'm just kind of, he brings up the food issue. And I was like, well, I'm just kind of curious. Well, what was your favorite dish in space? And he's like, hands down, shrimp cocktail. And I was like, really? Shrimp cocktail? And he's like, yep, it has nothing to do with rubbery shrimp. Those things are terrible. It's the cocktail sauce. And I was like, why? And he's like, "Well, here's the problem, that people don't realize is because you're in a low gravity environment, your sinuses don't drain properly. And so you have this kind of perpetual head cold. And so nothing tastes. You can't taste really anything. And the only way to taste something is to open up all your nasal cavities. And lo and behold, the cocktail sauce that NASA buys from this company in Oregon, they put like 3 times the amount of horseradish in this stuff, and so it opens us up. And so he's like, "It really has nothing to do with, you know, the shrimp cocktail itself, it's the cocktail sauce so that I can actually taste something." And I've had astronauts in, they're like, "Oh yeah, I've put like Dijon mustard on apple pie just so that I could actually taste the apple." And, just crazy, crazy stuff like that, right? Sriracha. And you talk to anybody and they're like, "Oh yeah, condiments are the thing on the space station. We have to send up boxes of condiments because of that reason. People can't smell and they can't taste." And besides, air number 1, water number 2, food is number 3 on the space station. And if you want unhappy astronauts, you know, mess with their food. So anyway, that's probably more than you wanted to hear, but that's what happened. So
No, that's really interesting. And I hope you can get them somehow the cherry tomatoes one day
yeah.
so they can have it.
Yeah, we
Just
worked on sending some food up there. Yeah.
maybe one day. Let me ask you about another thing I saw that's related to you, which is the relationship between food and storytelling. So, when did you figure out this relationship? You say that you had like 30 years in a different industry, then you went back to hospitality. When did you figure out this relationship?
Hmm. Well, I mean, I guess I come from a family of foodies and talkers, so maybe it's just natural. But I think when I would go travel for work, I always made a point to figure out what were the things that locals were eating, right? And the funniest story I can tell you was the first time I went to China, which was like, I want to say around 2000, 99, 2000, somewhere in there. And I went to Beijing, and the host that I had there was like, we're so happy to have you here. There's this great new restaurant that just opened up, and we're going to take you there for lunch. The lines are incredibly long, but I've got a friend. He works there. He's going to get us in. Da 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 da. And I was like, oh, okay, great. I'm looking forward to this, right? And so we leave the office building and we walk a few blocks, and pretty soon I see this line of people, stretching for what looked like a mile. And I was like, wow, I'm really excited. What is this place? And we get to the restaurant, and it's Schlotsky's. And I'm like, you took me to Schlotsky's? And he's like, oh yeah, this is like the greatest thing ever. And I'm like, there's like one of these on every corner in America. It's a sandwich place. And, but for them, this was like, incredible, right? It's American, it's new, they've never seen this thing before. And, everybody wanted to be there. And I was like, okay. I said, fine, I don't mind having Schlotsky's for lunch, it's like being home. But can we go where you would take your family for dinner, or would you just take me home, and let me eat with your family? Because that's what I prefer to do. And he was like, okay, absolutely, whatever. And so that night, he sends a taxi. I do not speak, Mandarin. There was no cell phones think about, late 90s, early 2000, like nothing, right? And uh, a guy in a red taxi shows up out in front of my hotel with a sign that, I think said Skinner on it, right? And I get in this taxi and we go driving, like a bat out of hell through Beijing for about 45 minutes, and eventually end up on this road that looks like, Vegas on steroids. There was so much neon, it was almost blinding. And it was just restaurant after restaurant after restaurant. And eventually we pull up in front of this restaurant, and the taxi driver's like, and I'm thinking, if this is the wrong address or what, I am screwed, because I have no way to communicate. I have no idea where I am. That's it. I'm done for. And so I get out of the car and I start walking, towards the door, and, here comes the guy I knew, and he's like, "Oh, you made it," and I'm like, "Yeah, thank God." And we go in, there's this huge restaurant, and, the walls are covered in pictures of the food, and they had these huge round tables, for like 20 people, and he's there with his family and some other people, and, we sit down, we have this fantastic meal that, I ate all kinds of things that I probably never would have ordered or, knew, um, but, it was one of those things that, and, and so I guess, from a storytelling standpoint, my whole thing is, you can go and just eat somewhere and just have food, right? Nourishment, right? And you can do that anytime, anywhere. It doesn't really matter. And many restaurants, that's kind of all there is, right? It's, here's your plate of food, hope you enjoy it. Please tip your waitress, and, hopefully we'll see you again, kind of thing. I wanted to create a environment where we could educate the guest on, here's where the food comes from. In ISHTIA, we buy as much as we can from other indigenous producers. So we get rice out of Minnesota from basically the Lakotas, and we buy rice and, or not rice, corn and beans from the Pimas in Arizona. Mm, my whole thing is, if I can help them in their business, and create a more authentic flavor profile for the guests, I want to share it. I want to talk to those guests about it. And we get people in all the time, and they're like, "That's the best rice I've ever had." And I'm like, "Absolutely." And I completely agree. And the only place you're gonna get it is if you order it from the reservation, right? You're not gonna find it in stores. You can't buy it in Whole Foods. You're not, because they have a finite production. And um, that's just, kind of my way of hoping to, keep these producers alive. And, but I think it also, I can't scientifically say it makes the food taste better, but if nothing else, it makes it more interesting and more memorable, which in the end probably makes it taste better. Because people will remember it and they'll talk to their friends about it and so forth. But I think that, there's storytelling just for storytelling's sake, and, there's a lot of fine dining restaurants that will, and some of them will even produce like a menu of, here's our producers and things like that, and I think that's all great, but I think a lot of them, it's like, I don't know. I don't know if it's an afterthought or if it's just a or if it's just kind of a rote thing that they kinda go through, but when we talk to guests about, "Hey, we get, our tepary beans from the Kemah reservation from Ramona," it's because, hey, they were the ones that actually hybridized this bean. It's one of the few that's native to North America. They're the only ones that still grow them. There's 3 different varieties. We use the black one in this dish because we think it has a nuttier flavor. It takes 8 hours to cook this bean to basically almost an al dente, consistency. We cook it with bison that we get, from basically the same land that the bean came from. That kind of significance, I think, is important to impart to the guest, but also I think creates that much stronger connection than if you just kind of say, well, we get our greens from, Farmer Bob, or whatever. Not that there's anything wrong with Farmer Bob, but we try and explain the intention behind this is why we use this ingredient. This is where we get it from, and this is why we buy it from. That was very long-winded for your storyteller question.
No, but that was really cool, by the way. Like, again, I'm enjoying every moment here. I have to say thank you so much. I know that I went beyond the time that I promised to stick to,
That's
but
okay.
that was too enjoyable to stop you at any moment. So thank you so much. Thanks for your time. Thanks for sharing these insights with our audience today.
Yes. Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much and have a good day.